So pretty much when the black, so that's your cue. So that's the black screen, and then that's when Carla, you can jump in because that's 5 minutes. I think you're muted, Carla. I didn't hear you.
That's a great.
Okay.
But we need to loop it back. We're also streaming live on Facebook.
Hello, Facebook.
Hello, Facebook. Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Carla Dinnold, and I am the Executive Director of Lebanon Cares Development Corporation, which is a Bedford-Stuyvesant community-based organization committed to uplifting the lives of African American community members in Bed-Stuy and the greater Brooklyn borough. I am happy to welcome you to our event and introduce our speakers tonight. Lebanon Cares and Know Your Rights BK are co-hosting this event, which is called A Conversation with District 36 Council candidate Henry Butler. During this event, you will hear more from the candidate about his campaigns and goals for our beloved community nested in Brooklyn. This conversation is framed with one interest in mind. How do we ensure equity for all Bedford-Stuyvesant residents post-COVID-19? Questions from our hosts are based around the recently released Recovery for All plan, Mayor Bill de Blasio's crisis response to rebuild New York City. Lebanon Cares and Know Your Rights BK are nonpartisan organizations whose efforts are solely directed towards educating and advocating on behalf of members of the greater Brooklyn community. Lebanon Cares and Know Your Rights BK do not endorse candidates for public office. Our resources are not used for partisan political purposes. Both organizations represented tonight hold true to their purpose of building the political knowledge and engagement of African American citizens in our communities who have for many years reported low rates of engagement in politics. Please stay tuned to the chat to see our room rules. Some of the rules that we have are that you please keep your mics muted and also add your questions in the question and answer slot, and we will be sure to answer them during that section. I will now introduce our hosts and our candidates for the evening. Dr. Roxann Clarke. Hold on one moment. Dr. Roxann Clarke serves as the co-founder and director of Know Your Rights. Hi, can you hear me now? Okay, great. And I sincerely apologize for our technical difficulties. Dr. Roxann Clarke serves as co-founder and director of Know Your Rights BK, which you can hear is our Brooklyn beautiful background noise, a Brooklyn-based organization focused on distributing accurate and easy to understand information pertaining to citizens knowing their rights. Know Your Rights BK believes that information and education will help citizens and residents create positive change in their communities. Dr. Clarke earned her Bachelor's of Science from Hampton University, where she also completed her Master's in Medical Science and Research. She obtained her doctorate in podiatric medicine and practices foot and ankle surgery in Brooklyn and Manhattan. She also serves on the Deacon Board at Mount Lebanon Baptist Church. She, along with her Know Your Rights BK co-founders, Akilah Williams and Stacey Gale, hope that through their organization, they can empower their Brooklyn community for the greater good. Dr. Clarke currently resides in East Flatbush, Brooklyn. Next, we have Tiffanie Burt, who serves as the Communications Director for Know Your Rights BK. She comes from a vast background of experiences that has labeled her as an up-and-coming brand strategist and community liaison that strives to focus on providing more businesses of color with strong blueprints in their respective fields and bridging the gap between higher educational institutions and communities they are based in. She comes to the Know Your Rights BK team with a BA in Communications, Public Relations Certificate, a minor in Business Administration from the University of Cincinnati, and a Master's in Professional Studies with a focus in Branding and Integrated Communications from the City College of New York. Currently, Tiffanie is a Community Projects Manager at the City College of New York, while serving as the Communications Lead for the Paul for Surrogate 2021 campaign. She is also currently the lead beauty writer for the Cincinnati Herald, one of the longest-running Black-owned print and online publications in the Midwest, and is also a member of Mount Lebanon Baptist Church. One of her favorite quotes, "My recipe for life is not being afraid of myself, afraid of what I think, or of my opinions," by Eartha Kitt, and she truly lives by it. Tiffanie considers herself a thriver and is referred to by her colleagues as a critical thinker who can take ideas and see them through to execution. She is from Cincinnati, Ohio, and currently resides in Brooklyn, New York. Last but certainly not least, Candidate Henry Butler is currently the District Manager for Community Board 3 of Bedford-Stuyvesant. In this role, he must maintain strong relationships with elected officials and city commissioners. Mr. Butler coordinates and monitors the delivery of services from various city agencies to the community of Bedford-Stuyvesant and plays an essential role in preparing the board's annual capital and expense budget requests to the Office of Management and Budget. In addition, Mr. Butler currently serves as president of the influential Vanguard Independent Democratic Association Club. Mr. Butler formerly served as the chairman of the Labor Committee for the Brooklyn NAACP. Mr. Butler also was born and raised in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn. After earning a degree in political science from Hunter College, he began his career in public administration as assistant director of Lafayette Gardens Community Center under the New York City Housing Authority. Mr. Butler then served as a caseworker for the Office of Child Support Enforcement. He was a member of Local 371 while employed by NYCHA and ACS. Mr. Butler went on to become a conductor of the New York City Transit Authority. During his 14 years with MTA, Mr. Butler was an active member of his union, TWU Local 100, serving as a shop steward in support of his fellow union members. Mr. Butler would later take on an even greater role, serving as the union's political organizer and community outreach liaison for Brooklyn, a position in which his proudest achievement was organizing and delivering relief efforts to the victims of Hurricane Sandy. I thank you so much, and I'm so glad to be sitting here with these excellent guests tonight. And I will now pass this on to Dr. Clarke. The conversation starts now.
Thank you, Carla. Welcome, Candidate Butler. We're just going to jump right into our first question, which is related to the pandemic. COVID-19 has statistically affected the African-American Black population more than any other group nationally. Currently, 9% of this population is vaccinated as of May 25th, 2021, according to the CDC. How would you help with the education and access of the vaccine to the African-American population, especially in the Bed-Stuy community?
Thank you for the question, Dr. Clarke. I think the pandemic has really, it has put a spotlight and has really shown the disparities between Black communities and other communities. It's something that we as a community already knew existed, but the pandemic really focused on it, whether it was education, whether it was health, whether it was small businesses, wealth. It really put a shine the spotlight on it. To answer your question, we have to lead by example first. I myself, went and got the shot along with my wife. I personally tried to really expose to everyone that I did it, whether it's through social media, just word of mouth that, this is something that is safe for our community. We all know the history when it comes to vaccinations and the Black community. Also, it's through education, constantly looking to educate our community. And I think we did, a good job with it on the community board level when we held several forums about the pandemic and COVID, and we held it with Black doctors from the community. People are going to trust those who look like them, and that's what we did on the community board level. And, so when the vaccines were available, we brought those doctors, to the community. These are people from the community who look like us. So it's really about educating, but who you're putting before our community to educate them with. And it has to be people from the community, who we are going to trust. And as I stated first, we have to lead by example to show that the vaccine was safe. Because I say to people all the time, that don't trust the vaccine, I tell them, COVID-19 has done a good job of killing our people. So I don't think they didn't need to create a vaccine to do that. The virus itself has done that. It has devastated our community. So we just have to lead by example and continually educate our community and, just keep pushing, but putting those voices before them that look like them and people who they can relate to.
Thank you.
That's such a great response, especially like the leading by example and then having people from our community, especially those who are educated, like the doctors in our community, everyone else, especially those who, who are in like political science and things like that, who know the things that the community needs to know. So that's a great, thank you for that response. Another question, or second question, this is more so on the fight for inequality within Bedford-Stuyvesant. So recently, Mayor de Blasio established the NYC Task Force on Racial Inclusion and Equity in 2020. This task force is comprised of leaders of colors from all across city government who identify new opportunities to push for progress and address inequality. In the Recovery for All plan, the Task Force on Equity and Inclusion will become a permanent structure in New York City's government. How can we replicate in the Bed-Stuy area or expand these efforts specifically in our district to assure the equitable distribution of community resources to constituents in the area? That's the first part of the question. Sorry, this is the long question. The second part is then how can organizations like Know Your Rights BK or Lebanon Cares advocate to ensure equitable distribution becomes a common practice in our community?
Okay, so forgive me if I don't remember, the second part of the question.
I can repeat it, it's fine. Yeah.
Okay, so on the first, let me just say this. I mean, the task force is a good idea. I don't know how effective it's going to be. You brought about it in your last year in the administration. I know it's supposed to continue, but every administration is going to have their own ideas when it comes to addressing this problem of inequality. So the task force is a good idea, but it's something that should have been done in the first year, of his administration. So we have actually a couple of people that are on this task force who are from the Bed-Stuy community. I believe Lori Daniel Favors, and Mega Evers. I believe she's one of the people that's on the task force. So that's the first step, making sure we have people from the community that are on this task force who can then report back to us and report back. When I say us, meaning the community and the organizations that can then partner with those that have these ideas and solutions, or what they feel are ideas and solutions to resolve the problems of inequality within our community. So that's the first step. As far as how do we continue it, as I stated, a new administration is coming January 1st. So then hopefully there won't be a setback where then there may change the people, that are sitting on the task force, as we speak today. So that's the first step of actually forming the task force, having people who look like us from the community, to represent and report back to us. What was the second part of the question?
So I guess the second part is more so like how, once we have like that first set done, how can organizations like Know Your Rights BK and Lebanon Cares advocate or ensure that there is equitable distribution and it becomes a common practice in the community?
So one thing that sometimes worries me about task force is they come up with the solutions and ideas, but then they don't have an action plan. How is that supposed to take place, whatever the solution ideas that they come up with? And the mistake that they make is basically what you just said. There's no plan to include community-based organizations with providing the services that the solution is stating. So what needs to happen is we need to be at the table, whether it's Lebanon Cares, Know Your Rights, they need to be at the table when decisions are being made about our community. It can't be those on the outside, it can't be those who are not from the community. There are plenty of organizations within Bedford-Stuyvesant, within North Crown Heights, who've been doing the work. They just haven't had the resources and the opportunities. So if this is going to provide resources and an action plan, that's what needs to take place. They need to go take it on to the ground, to the community-based organizations that already exist. So once whatever plan is established, a solution is established, then that should be then brought about. It should be meetings held with the community-based organizations within our community. So then we can, when I say we, mean Lebanon Cares, Know Your Rights, then can, fulfill, those goals and commitments that were stated within, whatever solution that came up from the task force.
Thank you. So the next set of questions, the 2 questions, are related to community power in neighborhood policing. So first question, with the height of racial tensions last year after the death of George Floyd, we started to see an increase in community becoming or wanting to become more separated from law enforcement. There are some local politicians who advocate that we cannot completely get rid of the law enforcement because of the rising crime rates. How do you envision bridging that gap between our community, local community, and the local police precinct in the district?
Okay, and that question right there is, I would say, the $1 million question. How do we balance between safety for our community? We are, victims of believe the highest victims of crime in New York City. But at the same time, we're also the highest victim of, police abuse in this city. So how do we strike that balance of them here to serve and protect us? Because their motto, right? Serve and protect us. So I'm gonna, straight off the back, I don't understand the conversation about we don't need any law enforcement. I don't understand. I think that's somewhat, honestly speaking, lazy to say that we don't need no law enforcement, especially when we don't have anything in place at this time to serve and protect our community. We don't have self-policing at this time. I mean, we talk about it, there's been so much conversation about it, but it does not exist today. So we do need some sort of police, force here in the community. Now it's about how are they going about their job of serving and protecting our community. My thing is, I don't believe the vast majority of people, Black people, are saying we don't want police officers. What we're saying is we want accountability. We want those who break the law to pay for breaking the law. If you're committing a crime, we want you to go on trial and be found guilty for the crime that you have committed on our community. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for accountability from the NYPD. How do we go about making that happen? I truly believe, and the law has been passed, any shooting involving a police officer, there should always be a special prosecutor, always in all situations, because the DA works with the NYPD. So we should always have a special prosecutor in those cases. We have to improve on, police and community relationships. They started the NCO program where it's supposed to be somewhat like, the old, back in the days we had the beat officer. Even that's not too effective because they're only there for 6 to 8 months, and then there's somebody new that's coming to patrol the area, and it's supposed to be your local, local police officer. So for me, it's a conversation of making sure rules are in place that's making that police officers are being held accountable for their illegal actions against our community, and respecting our community and serving and protecting our community where they do any other community. But that's something that needs to start at the top, from the mayor and from the police commissioner, and then it works its way down to the commanding officer of the precinct. It's about culture, and that takes a cultural change. But in order for that to happen, it has to start at the top. One of the solutions is, we probably do need to strengthen the Civilian Complaint Review Board. Probably does need to be strengthened and giving them more power, when they make a decision, come out with a decision that needs to then be enforced. So those are just, one of the solutions that's been put out there which I think that we really need to look into, is increasing the strength of the Civilian Complaint Review Board, because too much power right now is with the commissioner. And so some of that power needs to be taken away from the commissioner. But I have to say that we don't need no police force is, to me, somewhat of a lazy solution, especially when nothing exists right now to protect our community.
So you touched on it, which was like the second part of the question. This portion was, defund the police has been a call to action in 2020, dealing with the increased numbers of deaths and harm caused by police officers, especially in our communities. Do you have any additional suggestions on how we can redistribute funds in the community if we are defunding the police?
And that is the correct terminology that you use. It's really about redistribution. And it's really about removing the police officers from situations that they should not be involved with. But then once we do that, we have to make sure funding then is going to those agencies that have to pick that up. So, for example, if there's a emotionally disturbed person who's not a danger to himself or others, then the first call should not be to the police department. It should be to social workers or whoever deals in that field. They should be coming out. So, which means then we have to have resources and more caseworkers and hiring more caseworkers to take on that responsibility. The same way we're saying we don't want police officers, in the schools. So we have to have more resources and more counselors and social workers then in the schools. If they're looking to pull out school safety officers, then you have to provide those resources. You can't play games with the budget like they did last year, where they really did not defund or redistribute. All they did was just move some titles around. It's what they did last year. So, for example, they don't want the police officers to deal with illegal vendors. They can't deal with that any longer. So it's the Department of Consumer Affairs that's supposed to deal with that. But at this time, the Department of Consumer Affairs, they don't have an enforcement unit. So if you own a sneaker store, you're paying rent, you're paying heat, lighting bills, and then someone sets up an illegal vendor shop in front of you selling the same sneakers you're selling. At this time, there is nothing to stop that person from selling their sneakers illegally in front of your store where you're paying rent for, as a small business owner, because they don't have an enforcement unit. So that's what I'm saying. When we're going to make these changes, we have to fully think them through. You just can't say, okay, we're going to stop them from doing this, but then there's nothing in place to actually pick up who needs to take on that responsibility now. And I think that's one of the mistakes that this current administration made when they said we're going to remove the police from dealing with certain responsibilities, but then they didn't give the other agencies more funding and more resources to take on that responsibility.
Thank you.
Thank you for that response. So we're going to shift a little bit more just from talking about policing in the community to closing the achievement gap. So this question is actually coming from our co-host of Lebanon Cares. Supporting the success of students in the community is an integral piece in the Lebanon Cares mission. The Recovery for All plan is promoting their 2021 Student Achievement Plan, which includes a three-pronged approach to confront the trauma and mental health crisis faced by our students. As quoted directly from the plan, beginning in the communities hardest hit by COVID-19, the DOE will make social, emotional, and academic behavioral screeners available for all students K through 12. And hire 150 additional social workers. How will you ensure that these services are brought to our community? If this is a specific pilot does not come to Bedford-Stuyvesant, then how will you advocate to ensure children in District 36 schools have their mental and emotional needs met when returning to school this fall?
Well, if they're saying that they're going to allocate this funding to communities that have been hit hardest, we know Bedford-Stuyvesant and North Crown Heights have been one of those communities that have been hit hardest. One of the responsibilities of a council member is oversight oversee agencies. And you hold public hearings and you track, and you're responsible for monitoring how the funding that is allocated to them after the budget process, it's completed, how they're spending that funding, the programs that you gave them funding for, where are those programs being distributed at, and what communities. So if the plan is saying we're going into the hardest hit community by COVID, and we know those are communities of color, those are Black communities, it would only make sense then that programs, those programs and those social workers are going to be placed in District 36, Council District 36, which includes School District 16 and 13, and a small portion of 14 within our district. And I can speak a little personally about this, having a 15-year-old and 12-year-old, and knowing what my kids went through, having to learn from home, and especially my youngest, who really did not adjust well to it at all. Did not adjust, missing his friends, becoming very lethargic, and just losing any enthusiasm, for school. So, that is the effect, the emotional and mental effect that COVID had on our children. So it is a great idea that they do plan to do this, because our children were greatly affected. So if I'm the council member, I'm going to be on top of this to make sure that those social workers are coming to the school districts within Council District 36, because our community, the numbers don't lie, have been affected, the most, by the COVID-19 virus. So that truly falls on the council member to follow the money and to follow the resources and where they're being spent at, especially if that's what the program is saying. And so, as I stated, we have oversight over those agencies, and if it's not happening, and that's when that particular committee, the education committee, will have public hearings to find out and ask, why is this funding and why those programs are not in those communities that you said it's supposed to go to.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So the next topic that we're going to go to is actually one of my favorites, along with, I feel like, a lot of Brooklynites. We're going to now switch it over to affordable housing. So Mount Lebanon and Lebanon Cares have worked for years with coalitions to advocate for affordable housing, with specific interest to housing for low-income senior citizens. How will you support the effort to bring affordable housing to the district for long-term community residents?
That is definitely the number one issue in the district. So let me answer that by saying I've already been doing that as the district manager of Community Board 3 for the past 8 years, and formerly the chair of Community Board 3 for 5 years. Any development that's built on city land has to come before the community board. It's called the ULUP process, Uniform Land Use Review Procedure. Basically, the city looks to develop property. They'll go through a process where they look to find a developer. It's called an RFP, request for a proposal. Once they pick that developer then starts the process of going through the ULUP process. And the ULUP process basically consists of, they have to go to the community board first, present the plan to the community board. The community board then holds a public hearing. But during that time, we have 60 days to render our opinion. We are already having committee meetings with that developer. Even before they pick a developer, even before it gets certified by the Department of City Planning, we've held several meetings with the developer. The next step in that process, then it goes before the borough president, who holds a public hearing, then to the Department of City Planning, who holds a public hearing, then to the city council in a particular committee, the housing committee, who holds public hearings. Then it goes to the full council for a vote, and then to the mayor's desk for a veto. He has 5 days to sign or veto it. What he's signing and veto, basically the plan that was put in place between the negotiations from the community board and HPD and the city council member. The person who has the most power is the council member, because the council member can kill a project or proceed with a project, on their word to their fellow members. Community Board 3, because of our great working relationship with our council members, because that is something I established as chair of the board and as district manager, Our council members depend on the opinion of the community board on how we feel about particular projects. So the Bedside House Initiative, for example, 5 city-owned properties within Community Board 3. Fulton and Saratoga, Fulton and Howard, Fulton and Ralph, property by the Utica Avenue train station next to Boys and Girls High School, and a property on Myrtle between Marcy and Notion, across street from the Marcy houses. That's city land. We were able to, to really negotiate and work with HPD to get them to finally fund that project, where they're going to build over 600 units of truly affordable housing based upon the income levels of this district. Part of the housing that's going to be built is senior housing, because we have probably the highest senior population in New York City, which is why we've been declared a NORC, which stands for Naturally Occurring Retirement District, which allows us to get more funding from the city and state because of such a high senior population we have. So that project is going to build senior housing, it's going to build low to moderate income rental housing, and also there will be some home ownership of co-ops or condos. So that's one project that I've worked on. Another project that has come before us, being on the state level, is being built right now across the street from Interfaith Hospital on Herkimer. That's senior housing, but that's on the state level, part of the One Brooklyn plan that is being built right now. So within those 5 properties in the project I just mentioned, we're going to have several units of affordable housing being built based upon the various income levels of CB3 and of District 36. And we were able to get out of that. 50% of those units have to go to Bed-Stuy District 36 residents. That's mandated in what was voted on and passed by the city council, which started with the community board. So I guess I just have to say this last part. People have to understand, development on private land does not come before the community board, and your council member does not have a say-so on development on private land. A developer can build, they can charge whatever rent they feel they can get. Our responsibility is to make sure they're building within the zoning of the area. So if the zoning requires you can't go no more than 10 stories, then we have to make sure they're building in no more than 10 stories. But anything on city land that comes before me, if I'm the council member, we will have affordable housing based upon the income levels of this district. I say that, I can say that confidently because I've done it as a member of 15 years on Community Board 3.
If I may jump in before Rox, you ask the next question, because I say this is an important topic for me because I live down the street from Vita, and I live right here on Tompkins and Myrtle. So I just wanted to also just follow up really quickly to ask, like, how do you plan to educate like the community members of like these housing projects and things of that nature? Because I know for myself, and this is me personally, not speaking on behalf of Know Your Rights or any other organization, I'm not aware of like the things that happen. So how do you plan to, like, I guess more so get the word out about these things happening within the community, especially when it comes down to affordable housing?
So when it came to the Bedside House Initiative, we actually for a whole year had community engagement series and meetings and seminars with the community as a whole. And it was the community that determined what sort of housing that they wanted built. So what came out of that was the senior housing, was home ownership, was low to moderate rental units within the district. So on the community level, I've been doing that, whether it's through social media, whether it's through the monthly community board meetings. I'm someone who constantly attends community meetings, off hours, whether, after 5 p.m., I'm going to different block and tenant association meetings. I'm going to meetings on Saturdays and Sundays. And then, of course, like I said, then you have to use all aspects that are there. So I use social media to get the word out, to the community as a whole. For example, in April, 2 of the projects that came before us were on Housing Connect, because HPD Housing Connect, where you go on and you apply for any affordable units projects, and we did a big push because these were units that were at income levels, that were perfect for our community. And for those who are looking for low to moderate income housing, the project was 1620 Fulton Street, next to the Woodward Funeral Home parking lot, and 645 Gates Avenue. Between Marcus Garvey and Troop. We were out there, unfortunately not going to reach everyone. So we depend on whether it's people like you, different organizations, block and tenant associations present, to also spread the word to the community when projects like this exist. But that's something I've been doing as a member of Community Board 3 for the past 15 years, of always trying to educate and get information out to my community. Like I said, unfortunately, you're not going to reach everybody, but that's why I depend on those other civic organizations and local community leaders to help spread the word and any information, particularly when it comes to a housing and affordable housing.
Thank you, because Tiffany actually asked the question that I was gonna ask. So I'll ask the next question regarding housing. So residents in NYCHA who complain about repairs not happening, how will you ensure that repairs, mold abatement, and other extreme health concerns of NYCHA residents will be addressed in District 36? And a follow-up question, how can you make sure that the $2 billion funding awarded to NYCHA gets funded in what is needed to be taken care of?
So let me say, the NYCHA issues I take very personally. I grew up in NYCHA. I grew up in the Tompkins houses. My father still resides in the Tompkins houses. My first job out of school was with NYCHA at the Lafayette Gardens Community Center. So I like to say, I'm that NYCHA candidate who understands the issues of NYCHA and who's seen it personally and still sees the lack of resources and really lack of respect for NYCHA residents. I think before I can fully answer, I think people need to understand that NYCHA is under the purview of the federal government. It's under HUD. And our congressional members and our U.S. senators really have the ears of HUD, who was supposed to be taking care of NYCHA. So the past 4 years under the previous administration, there was a total neglect of NYCHA. There was a defunding really of NYCHA. My role, if I'm the council member, is to work with the federal officials and to work with the state official who also funds NYCHA, because funding for NYCHA from the city council is the bare minimum, that the funding comes from the city council. If you look at the budget lines, the bare minimum comes from the city council. The vast majority of funding comes from the state and our federal officials, and particularly on the federal level from HUD. But the job of the council member is to hear the concerns and to address the concerns of NYCHA residents, and to make sure that those who are responsible for taking care of those issues and concerns, that you're getting that information to them. So my role is working with our state and federal officials, working with NYCHA on the local level with those authorities to make sure that they are delivering the services. Like, for example, a senior citizen in one of the NYCHA senior buildings, a whole year she was waiting for a new refrigerator. A whole year. I had to call my liaison from the mayor's office to find out why is this senior lady who's in a senior building is waiting for her refrigerator for a whole year. Now, because I knew someone from the mayor's office who could then make the call and then make it happen and get the senior her refrigerator, but that's not in every case. There are thousands of problems out there happening. I can't even make a call to get my father's situation taken care of right away, So I'm saying there needs to be a whole revamping of the NYCHA system and how it works. Now, onto the $2 billion, once again, that's making sure that funding is coming down and being spent responsibly and the way it's supposed to be spent and not getting lost, which is what happens a lot of time. So that's once again, working with your state and federal officials who are supposed to be monitoring that money that's coming from HUD and making sure it's coming from Washington to Albany and then down to New York City, and making sure that whoever gets the contracts to make these repairs, that it is really happening. The problem is there's always been problems with oversight and monitoring of these contracts when contractors are picked to deal with the NYCHA issues. So because, and I wish as a council member we could do more, on the NYCHA when it comes to NYCHA, but it really requires us to have that working relationship with our state and federal officials who have more authority over NYCHA than we do.
I just have a follow-up with that. So, Mr. Butler, what do you suggest that your constituents do as far as, people that live in NYCHA housing, people that have family members that live in NYCHA housing? How can we support, if you were council, our city council of District 36, how can we support you to make sure that voices are heard and things are done? How can your constituents support you?
Great question. NYCHA residents have to advocate. And what do I mean by that? There was a time when I'm talking about this district right now, the vast majority of the votes came out of NYCHA. That's where the votes came from. It came out of NYCHA. But today, when you look at the numbers, NYCHA has the most registered, and I'm just speaking as a Democrat, I'm a registered Democrat, the most registered Democrats in this district. NYCHA has the lowest turnout on election day, even though they have the most registered Democrats. Okay, so we have to, and I understand, you're discouraged, you don't see anything happening, but I think when NYCHA they don't understand the power that they have in their vote and in their advocacy and in their voices. So my job is to galvanize them and make sure their voices are heard and teach them how to advocate for the changes that are needed. And sometimes that involves protesting, letter writing, phone calls, but they have to make noise, and the biggest noise they can make is at the ballot. That's the biggest noise they can make as residents, of this city. So that's my role as a councilman. I can't go, and I tell my community all the time, I can go to a budget meeting and advocate for you, but if the next community is going to a budget meeting and that council member is bringing 100 and 200 of his community members to that budget meeting, well, guess who they're listening to? You see, so it's not, a lot of times we just put it on the council member, but it's the council member along with the community as a whole, the residents and the different organizations working together to make sure our voices are heard.
Thank you for that answer.
I was going to say, I think community advocacy, especially one of the things that I personally didn't know is the amount of power that the NYCHA residents have, but that's, me being, I am a transplant to Brooklyn, but I've been here for a few years and I live near a lot of the NYCHA properties. So I think that's actually very interesting. And I think one of the things that we need to also think about as community organizations is, like how you said, how do we connect with them on a different level to get them to the ballots, to get them to the polls to vote, and to make sure that their voices are heard. So thank you for that. The next series of questions, or next question I should say, is another one that is very dear and near and true to my heart. It's about food insecurity within the Bed-Stuy area. So one of the things the pandemic has shown us more than ever is the real need for affordable quality grocery stores. Do you have plans to advocate for more affordable quality grocery stores in this district to help fight against food insecurity and price gouging?
So on that question, and the ironic part about that question about the food insecurities, so we were deemed the food desert, is what we were deemed. Community Board 3 Bedford-Stuyvesant was deemed the food desert, and so the city came up with this program called the Fresh Market, Fresh Food program that they came up with, which was supposed to bring, more quality grocery stores, fruits, vegetables, what it's supposed to bring. But as we saw, that's what was not happening. Basically, how the program works is if a developer decides to do a fresh market, they get what we call a bonus. And a bonus basically, in layman's terms, they get to build an extra 1 or 2 stories onto their building. And they get, but as long as they're going to put a fresh market on the ground level. And we got several projects like that were coming through. The problem with it was the stores that so far are somewhat those high-end stores, which a lot of our community residents cannot afford. At this time, let's be honest about that. With some of the products that are being sold at, some of the price points, I should say, that they are being sold at. So how do we bring about more and really spread it out throughout the community? Because Fulton Street has an array of grocery stores, but there are other parts of the district, particularly in the northern part, along Myrtle Avenue, where you said you are and where I grew up at. We lost one on Myrtle and Troop Avenue that we lost. They're supposed to be building a new one there with the housing that's going up, but we don't know yet. How do we go about it? So we have to incentivize and give incentives for grocers and grocery stores to come to the community. So whether that's through tax abatements or whether that's through commercial spaces being rented out at a lower rate, those are things that need to take place. So there has to be a real effort put forth by the administration, to put funding toward that particular program. And that's something I look to push because, as one who grew up on the north end of the district where you are residing at now, and so I'm there all the time because I stated my father still resides down there. I see the differences of compared to the south end of the district of Fulton Street, compared to the north end along Myrtle Avenue, where the insecurities are really, exist now. Like they're losing the is it the Food Bazaar that they're losing on Myrtle and Lewis at this time because they're going to do renovation and put some housing. It's supposed to come back, but it's going to be gone for 2 years. So that's another grocery store that they're losing down on the north end of the district. So to really answer the question, that is something as a council member that you have to go out and recruit and then put incentives in place to get grocery stores to come to your district. So whether that's through tax abatement or cuts on the commercial spaces, you as a councilman have to actually literally go out there and advocate for your district to get these different stores there. And that's having conversation with the different food chains and grocery store chains to try to show them this is where they need to open up and bring their stores to our district.
Thank you for answering these questions and actually giving some background to the processes behind what people don't know about. We're gonna turn this over to our audience. Whoever's on Zoom or joining us via Facebook Live, please give us your questions so we can ask Mr. Butler so that as much as you can about this candidate to vote on June 22nd, which is coming up. We have a question in the chat. Question is, what are your thoughts on creating workforce opportunities for young adults aged 18 to 24?
So that is something that if you go to my website and you look at my economic development plan, that's one of the bullet points that I have. Is for more funding for workforce development for that particular age bracket, 18 to 24, 18 to 26, because everybody, doesn't want to go to college when they get, out of school. There was a time when you were able to learn a trade in high school and can get a decent paying job, right out of high school. So everything really boils down to funding. It's always about the budget. So that's why when the budget process is taking place, it's about then priorities of the administration and priorities of the council member. And what are you willing to fight for as when it comes to particular funding within your district? And if you have those community-based organizations who, one of their responsibilities is workforce development, then you as a council member, you're going to be fighting to get funding for those organizations that do that type of work. And we have several organizations that do that within District 36. So for me, and looking at the population within our district of that 18 to 26, and that population, looking at the unemployment numbers for that population, which is very high, compared to other communities. The way to deal with that is through workforce development, but not just teaching them something, but then also we have to connect with other businesses. So then when they're finished the workforce development program, that there is a job waiting for them. One of the most frustrating things for young people when they go through all this training and all this program, in these different programs, and then when it's over, they get this certificate and then there's nothing there. So it just can't stop with the training. Then it has to be follow-up with them, to make sure that they're going on interviews, they have the opportunity to actually find employment. And this is why we have to bring private industry into the conversation. There's a place for the city and government, but then we have to work with private industry to make sure that when these young people finish these workforce development programs, there's a job waiting for them, because they get frustrated after that. And you tell them, well, go into another program. And they're like, why? I'm gonna do this program for 8-10 weeks a year, and then there's nothing for me after that. So, so it's more than just workforce development training and program. We have to connect with private industry to make sure there's a job waiting for these young people when they finish the training.
Just for a follow-up question on that, do you think that that's more also a place for higher education to play a role in? Because I know that there are some higher education institutions that are actually working on workforce development programs who are trying to, connect directly with industry professionals as well. So is that a place that you see higher education working its way into as well? And how do you see that connection formulating?
No, without a doubt, higher education, should play a role in that. Matter of fact, I remember, and this is a long time ago, when I finished school at Hunter, we had that. There was a department we could go to, and they were connected to several private companies that they would set up interviews for us, because as we were graduating, to go on interviews, with these private companies. So that's definitely something that should continue. There has to be a partnership. I mean, I just feel like we're not using our resources to the best of our ability that we can, and we're not using private industry, and particularly within our community. We're not making private industry give back. We are one of the biggest consumers, in this country, in this world. Okay, so we need to make sure they are giving back to our community. So yes, whether it's private industry working with higher education, or private industry working with the different community-based organizations that have these sort of workforce programs, yes, that needs to happen. And that's how I look, if I'm the council member, to govern, is to have those relationships with private industry to make sure that my community, who spends all their dollars on, within the private industry, that these private industries are giving back to our community.
So I don't see any questions in the chat right now, unless some came to Rox. But the next set of questions is more so like a lightning round. We can get to know District Leader Butler a little bit. So one of the questions is, what could you say are your life experiences or events that led you to have a desire to become a public servant? You can name one or two.
One was when I, as a kid, played a lot of sports. And we traveled to different neighborhoods, communities, and I noticed when we would go to other communities and then play, in their ball fields or their parks, and showing how beautiful it looked and how great it looked, and then coming back to our neighborhood, and I was just not looking that way. And I was, as a teenager, I'm asking myself, like, why is that? Like, how come we don't have the turf fields or the fiberglass backboards? How come our parks don't look the way the parks look in other communities? And I wanted answers, to that. And so I think that was like the initial events that happened that led me to where I am today, because it was just always noticing the disparities and the differences from my communities to other communities. And so that started as a teenager. When I would have those thoughts in my head, why is this taking place?
And our final question for the evening is, do you have anything to say to voters heading to the ballots June 22nd, or, you know, people that may not think that they want to head to the ballot on June 22nd? Do you have anything you want to say to them? You have the floor.
So I'm looking at the early voting that's taking place now, and turnout is very, very, very low, especially compared to the early voting that took place last year. Because everybody was so just amped up, you know, to vote against Trump, and the turnout was like a turnout I've never seen in my lifetime. That happened last year, and I say to the voters, the most important elections are your local elections. Those are the most important elections. The president of the United States really has nothing to do with the funding for your parks. The president of the United States has nothing to do really, to a certain degree, the funding for your roadways. Yes, we get funding from the federal government, but how that funding is spent is decided by your council members in New York City. The fundings for your schools, the fundings for your hospitals, the funding for housing is determined by your council member. What are the priorities of your council member? That council member is there to serve the community. You elected them, or whether you even vote for them. Even if you didn't vote for that councilman, they are there to serve you. They are there to represent the residents of the 36th council district. So I would say to those who, you know, who don't seem to be as enthusiastic this time around, when you go outside tomorrow and you don't see, you know, that trash picked up, or you see the pothole in the street, or the street light is out, or your kid's school doesn't have the technology within their school, or you're not seeing enough affordable housing being built in your community, that's determined by your local officials, whether it's on the council level or on the state level. They're the ones who make those decisions on your quality of life, on your day-to-day quality of life. So please understand, you must participate on the local level. Those are the elections that really, you know, has an effect on you as a citizen. Every single day, every part everything that you do affects you. You taking a train, well, guess who's funded the New York City Transit Authority? It's called New York City Transit Authority. Even though it's on the state level, the MTA, it's still the New York City Transit Authority. You know, so that's my message, you know, to everyone out there. Always remember, it's your local elections that affect your life on a day-to-day basis.
Well, thank you so much, District Leader Butler. How can the people in the audience on Facebook, those who watch the recording later, how can they connect with you and your campaign?
Oh, they can please go to our website on Henry Butler City Council.com. I believe I had it posted. They can always stop by the office at 399 Tompkins Avenue. You know, the office is open all day, especially now that it's crunch time. You know, we're down to the last 6 days, you know, before we get to last 5 days, before we get to the 22nd. So yes, so please go to the website, and they can, you know, shoot us an email, and, you know, if they want to get involved or just want to learn more about me, you know, please just reach out, you know, shoot us an email, and, you know, and I personally will get back to you. We just want to know more about me and my policy and where I stand, and just my history of as someone who was raised in this community, as I stated, raised in the Tompkins houses and been here for 49 years of the 54 years of my life.
Thank you. We'd like to thank candidate Henry Butler for joining us and talking about the issues that are important to District 36 and the greater Brooklyn community. We're here representing Know Your Rights and Lebanon Cares. We like to thank Mount Lebanon for give us access to this Zoom. This Zoom is recorded. We will have it on our social media in case you had any questions. You joined in the chat late to see what Mr. Butler has to say about the important issues. Thank you again. We're signing off now. Thank you again, Mr. Butler.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. Have a great evening, everyone.
Okay.
All right,
Okay.
good night,
Thank you.
everyone.
Good night.